I'm Destiny Wilson with the Newport News Police Department, a former young adult police commissioner. Today I'll be interviewing Chief Drew. How are you doing today, Chief?
So far, so good. Good afternoon.
So recently, you've been receiving questions as far as policing go. Why now do you think these questions have arrived?
Well, I think it's pretty clear. I think there's a lot of questions and it's funny, you're exactly right. There's a lot of questions that are coming into the department by different individuals, some in-state from our city and some from outside, even other jurisdictions, other states, that are asking questions about our training and our policies and procedures. A lot of those things were being asked because of the horrific death of Mr. Floyd in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and then following up just a short time later, the death of Mr. Brooks that occurred in Atlanta, both at the hands of interacting with the police department. So it's prompted a lot of questions about policing, a lot of questions about reform, training and education, and although those two incidents, those two deaths, as horrific as they are, that they happened in other states, it makes people take a step back and look at policing as a whole. And I remember when they first happened, I was asked by a reporter, do you think it will impact Newport News? Those two incidents, those two deaths, send a ripple effect across all of law enforcement, across our country. And I think that's why we're getting some of the questions. So I hope you've got a good list there. It's important, I think, to try to be transparent and address citizens' concerns. So there have been a lot of people who've called in and asked, but a lot of the questions seem to be the same questions. So I think it's important to try to address some of those today.
We've heard you mention 21st century policing. Can you please elaborate on that? So
after there was a individual in Ferguson, Missouri, that lost his life at the hands of police in an interaction that they had several years ago. President Obama was the president at the time, and he put a commission together. And they called the commission, it was really a lot of the things that we're talking about today, police reform and how to have the best police department, how to, it'd be great if we had a crystal ball and we knew where to be before an incident happened, but how do we do things better? And how do we reduce the probability of some bad things happening in the career and the world of policing? So we put a commission together. A friend of mine, Chief Ramsey, who was over Philadelphia Police Department, he headed the commission, and they called it 21st Century Policing. And they came up after they did the study and had professionals and educators, psychologists, social sciences, just looking at a variety of ways of what is the best way to police communities in the 21st century, right? So I'm going to read them to you. When I got sworn in 2 years ago, in my opening speech to this department and this community, I cited all 6 of these. And I think they're our foundation of what we do in the Newport News Police Department. So not in any order. Building trust and legitimacy, having the community trust this department. Police policy and oversight, to making sure that we're accredited, that we're having professionals look at what we're doing, our policies and procedures, and are they in line with best practices, what has proven to be effective. Technology and social media. We've got to stay upbeat on all the new technology and changes that come in, and social media is another way of communicating, getting our message out, telling our story, not waiting for media to do it, but making sure that we're doing it and getting information out to our community. Community policing and crime reduction, those are, that is probably one of the most famous for me. Community policing and crime reduction. What do? We got to reduce crime in our city. We got to solve crime when it happens. And how do we best do that? Through community policing. That's our foundation. How we interact with each other, how we talk to each other, how we treat our citizens, those that need our services, those that have been arrested, those that are victims, those that are in our communities. That is the foundation of everything that we do. Training and education, that's how we train our officers to do better, not just our recruits. I think a lot of people get tied up with, well, how are you training recruits? How are you talking about recruits? But also our officers. We are required to go through 40 hours of in-service every 2 years. Here in this department, we go through 40 hours of in-service every year. But it's always looking at the best trends and what's new. And hopefully we'll talk a little bit about some of the new ways we're training in law enforcement and here in Newport News, but I think that's important. And the last is officer wellness and safety. Now when I talk about officer wellness and safety, I'm talking about the individual, right? To make sure that they have the best environment to work in, that they have the equipment that they need to work in, but also that officers see a lot. They see the worst things that happen in society. Now, I do believe that gives us the opportunity to be at our very best. But they see individuals who are hurting, who are suffering, whether it's a traffic accident or injury to a child, domestic violence situations. That stays in our mind. And we suppress that and we go into the next call. But that affects people. And one thing I think is important to remember in law enforcement, although we put this badge on in this uniform, male or female, doesn't make any difference. We're all human. We're all individuals. And things that we see and how we interact and scenes that we're called to, they affect us. So we don't always get it right. We make mistakes. We're held to a higher standard and we should be. But we got to remember what these men and women do at a split second. We don't get the opportunity to sit back and review it and second guess it from an office, right? To see it on a computer screen and slow a camera footage down and move it frame by frame. Officers are called to respond and make split-second decisions, but they're still human, and we got to remember that.
I understand the Newport News Police Department just received their TRIAC award for accreditation. What does it mean to be accredited, and what are the standards developed?
So, one of the things we talk about police department, 21st century policing, is policy and oversight. Our policy is how officers are supposed to act and what we're supposed to do. It sets guidelines and parameters of how we handle calls, how we handle situations, how we handle training. There are agencies all across the country, right? All the different police departments, not just here in Virginia, but across the United States, that study best practices, what works in one city, what's failed in one city, and that we're able to take that and mold it into different departments. A lot of grants that come out, you have to be at a certain level of certification or certified to even apply for grants. But I don't do it for the money. CALEA is an organization that comes in and looks at your department from top to bottom. And they really look at three different things. They can look at your policies and procedures, what's written down in documents. They can look at your training academy, how you're training officers, how you're training new recruits that come in. And some departments, like here in Newport News, 911 Center or communications falls under the police department. Some departments have it, some cities have communication that stand by itself. But here, it falls under the police department. So our dispatchers, our training academy, and of course our policies and procedures. Now some departments will ask CALEA to come in and do an evaluation of one of those three. If you have all three, departments may ask CALEA to come in and do one in 2018, do one in 2019, do one in 2020. Because it's a lot of evaluation, and it takes months to get it completed. This year, well in 2019, we asked CALEA, C-A-L-E-A, to come in and evaluate our department from top to bottom. And we did all three at the same time. That means they were doing communications evaluation, they were doing our policies and procedures for our department, and they were also doing our training academy. I opened the doors, transparency, right? Trust and transparency. I opened the doors and allowed this agency to come in and do a thorough evaluation. That's important. It shows that our department is professional. What is best practices? And CALEA is made up of retired officers, a lot of former police chiefs, lawyers, professionals in law enforcement, individuals who have degrees in psychology about entities and about organizations with funneling through police and community. So CALEA came in, they did reviewed all of those entities, right? Our policies, our training academy, our 911 center, and at the end, to even go more legitimate and more transparent, they open up the doors and they invite the community to come in and talk about the Newport News Police Department. So they don't talk to us, right? They talk to the CALEA assessors, those that are actually grading our department. So I was really blown away. When we had our community forum, I had students came in and talked about the department, faith leaders came in and talked about the department, business leaders, individuals from the Boys and Girls Club, the YMCA. I was really touched by the individuals that came in and talked about this department. So as they put their report together, and at the end, 2 days before they left, they met in the chief's conference room, myself and the assistant chiefs and all the assessors, right? And they talked about their report. Now they have to submit the report and it takes a couple months for it to come back if we pass or don't. But they talked about our policies and procedures. They talked about our training department. They talked about our 911 center. And they passed us on all three. Now, what's good about CALEA is they give us recommendations to even do better, right? How do we even do better? But where we're at, we had reached a higher level. We had passed all three. So when you talk about the TRIAC award is TRI, right? 3. We passed our accreditation for our policy and procedures, for our training, not just for recruits, but for our department. And we also passed for our 911 center and how we dispatch calls. Meaning, like, how long does it take us to get to a call? What are our procedures as we dispatch or answer the phone? All those things are vital. And to get that Triarch Award, 22 departments in the country, 22 departments in the United States have that Triarch Award, and we're one of them. And that's something to be very proud of. The citizens should be proud of that. When we talk about, is this a professional organization? Absolutely. Does it mean we always get it right? No. But it means that we're paying assessors, professionals to come in who have a background in policing and in law enforcement to come in and assess our department. And are we on the right track? Are we doing best practices? And to get that award, we just got the plaques. They're hanging up in the office now. That's one of that was a very proud moment for me. A lot of people worked hard. It takes a long time. There's a lot of effort to get that, but it's a standard we should set in policing and achieve our best to obtain it.
You've done a lot in the 2 years since joining the Newport News Police Department. What are some accomplishments you would say that you're most proud of? So
for me, it's 3. And I'm going to give them to you in reverse order. You say 2 years, but I'll tell you, it feels like 5 already. It feels like it's just going and going, right? So the first, I think, is important. Citizens sometimes ask me, why do you focus on crime numbers so much? Because if citizens are victims, if they have something stolen or they're injured, or they expect a result. So crime reduction is huge. So I got here in July 2nd of 2018. We had a 5% reduction in crime in 2018 compared to 2017. We reduced crime 9% in 2019 compared to 2018. And right now today, although we're halfway through the year, we're sitting at a 6% reduction already. So crime has continued to go down. So crime reduction, our clearance rates are important to me, that we're solving crime when it happens, especially those big crimes of violence, aggravated assault where there's a shooting or a homicide. Those families are hurting and they need closure. And I want to make sure that we're giving the best service we can to families who've lost loved ones or have been victims of crimes. But the thing that's most important to me, and I would say is my biggest achievement, look, for me it's one I'm most proud of, is our Community Youth and Outreach Division. When I got here, I thought the department was a little off kilter. I didn't think we had enough resources for outreach. And if I'm going to talk the talk about community policing, I've got to structure this department that we're moving that direction. So we decreased some units, our narcotics division. We shrank it down. We put some resources back in the precincts, and we created the Community Youth and Outreach Division. That's all our school resource officers that work with every high school and every middle school in the city. And it's also 4 or 5 other officers that do community outreach on a large scale. And when I talk about a large scale, I talk about coaching boys and girls basketball with the 8 boys and girls clubs that we have here in Newport News. Whether I learned that kickball is a big sport here in Newport News, and to work with those individuals is important to me. Young adult police commissioners. That's a freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior out of every high school, right, that we work with here in our city. Every high school. And we meet with them every Thursday from 3 to 6. And we talk about hot issues, right? It's not just coming out and hanging out and eating pizza. We talk about diversity. We talk about leadership. We talk about bullying. We talk about gang awareness, issues with drug addiction, homelessness. We talk about how young people see this department, how they see their community, what they expect from their leaders. And that's important. So all those things, I wish I could tell you that there's about 24 things that we've done new just with that community outreach division, community walks, our care walks after critical incidents happen, adopting 26 elementary schools, getting to know our community, right? That's the foundation of this department. That is the busiest division I have. There's a reason for that. That's where our number one priority has to be, is the citizens that we serve, that we put our hand, right? We raised our hand and took an oath to serve and protect the citizens of this city.
How are police recruits screened when they come to the Newport News Police
Wow,
Department?
I get asked that question a lot. So, how do we bring new people in? And that's, I will tell you, what we do in Newport News is very, very progressive. And I can think of at least 3, if not 4 departments who have called and came here, not only visited or called and asked, what are you doing? How are you getting these recruits in so fast? How are you processing? and it's multi-layered. So I'm going to try to list a couple of them. There's about 10 or 12 steps. You do the original application. You're assigned a background investigator right away. There's a polygraph test. There's a panel interview where you react to scenarios on a computer screen, and it's graded by education professionals, not even law enforcement, education professionals. There's a psychological visit to our department psychologist. There's a panel interview with I have 7 captains in the department. They sit around a table, and 4 out of the 7 have to vote that recruit goes to the next level. There's a social media search, right? You would go back through that individual who's applying. So if I'm applying to a department, what social media outlets do you use? Whether it's, and you're going to laugh, but whether it's Facebook or Twitter, Instagram, is that right? I got to get caught up on those, but they do a thorough search, and we have the ability to do those things. We require our individuals, recruits, to do a ride-along, so they get an idea of what it's like to ride with the police. But here, look, I'm giving a secret away. We select the officers they ride with, so we get a report back from the officers they ride with. So if I'm riding as a ride-along and looking at this department, and you're the officer, and I'm asking you, like, well, what kind of guns do you use, and how often do you get to shoot, and what kind of explosives do you have, and how fast do the cars go? That's not really what I'm looking for. That's some information I'd like to have. What I'm looking for is that recruit to ask, how many calls do you go on? How many citizens do you get to interact with? What are some of the problems you get to help people with? What do you do with youth? Those things matter. So we get a report back from that officer that they ride with. So we talked about social media, the ride-along. The very last phase, right? Polygraph test, right? The very last phase is they have an interview with me. And they sit in my office like we are, right across from each other. And I'm not asking them what their grades were in high school or where they finished in college. I want to know, why do you even want to get in this field? Now, I will tell you, 27 years ago when I started, you heard questions like, you got the best uniforms, you got the best cars, you get to be the police here. What I hear now is, and maybe it's because of technology, but we see how much you interact with youth, meaning the department. We see how much you do with kids, the outreach that you do, the different divisions that you have, the room for growth. The city of Newport News is a great city to work for. It's very different answers than I'm used to 25, 27 years ago. So I asked them, why do you want to get into law enforcement? Where do you see yourself in the next 5 years? What do you want to do while you're here? What are your passions? But the last question I asked them is, all of those things you've just mentioned, why do you want to do them in this city? Why do you want to be an officer in Newport News? I forgot to mention when you talk about bringing new people on, we also do a home visit. We don't tell them the exact day we're coming, but the recruiter will go to their house, interact with their family, whether they live at home with their parents or loved ones or partner, whatever it may be. It gets us an idea a little bit about their environment, about how their family feels. Do they have a support staff around them? And then again, that final interview with me where it's just one-on-one, right? There's no papers, there's no polygraphs. It's just a conversation about, why do you want to get in to this department? And I will tell you, giving my secrets away, I'm not looking for who does the best in the academy on the written test, or who's the best pursuit driver, who has the highest qualification score, who writes the best reports. All those are important, and I get it. But for me, I'm looking for people who care about community, who care about youth, who want to solve problems, who want to bring people together and not just write a report, maybe or maybe not make an arrest and leave. That who are going to invest in this community, invest in citizens, to work with our business and our faith leaders to get people the right resources they need. That's what I'm looking forward to bring into this department, and that's how we vet new officers.
Are police officers required to step in if they see another officer using excessive force? They
are, and I'll tell you, it's one of the things that we saw, especially in the situation in Minneapolis with Mr. Floyd and his death, right? There were a couple officers standing around, and I would never judge another department. That's not what I'm not doing that in any. They may have been watching the crowd or whatever. But I heard the national conversation about duty to intervene. Now, in our code of conduct, we have duty to report. So if an officer does something wrong, and I'm going to use myself, if the chief of police does something wrong, you should report that to the supervisor, right? So an officer would report it to a sergeant would report it to a lieutenant, whatever. Duty to report. If you see something wrong, you have a duty, an obligation to let the supervisor know about it. I would have never thought in law enforcement that we need, in black and white, duty to intervene. I would think that if you see somebody doing something wrong, you would stop it. I think that goes into our moral conduct, our humanity, right? But I see more and more I heard the conversation, and I wanted to put it in black and white. I looked at a couple different departments. Baltimore, who is under a consent decree, meaning that there's some pretty strict guidelines of how they have to run the department. They had it in their policy, and I give them credit. It's very well written. I took it right from Baltimore and put it in our policy, the duty to intervene. So when you ask, are they required to? Yes, we are. And now it's in black and white. On June 5th, I put that in our policy. And what that states is, so I'm going to again use myself. If I'm in an argument with a citizen and I start to get upset and frustrated, right, and I start to raise my voice, that not only an assistant chief, a captain, a lieutenant, or a patrolman, or even a recruit, I expect them to step in between and say, whether it's, hey chief, let me talk to this person, or hey chief, you got a minute, to de-escalate, right? And I use myself in that situation because I don't want officers to feel, well, this officer's got more time than me, I'm going to get in trouble if I say something to him or her. Or she's a sergeant, or he's a lieutenant, she's a captain, I'm not going to say anything. The duty to intervene is for every officer that wears this badge, this uniform. Doesn't matter to me about rank. I don't care if you're a recruit, a 25-year veteran, or the chief of police. We have to hold ourselves accountable. If we're going to talk about this department and this organization being professional, it takes all 460 members of this department to make sure that we're holding each other accountable and that we're being professional. So I do have in writing now the duty to intervene. I think it goes without saying that we should do it, but I want to make sure that we are doing it, and I want it to be in black and white where people can see that that's how important it is to me that we put it down on paper. And then one of the questions I had got, well, if someone doesn't, can they get in trouble for that? Yes. And if you make that across the board a standard, then everybody gets it. But it rests on my shoulders as the chief to create a culture in this department that encourages that, to make sure that we're looking out for each other. I'm not talking about covering each other, looking out for each other to make this department credible and to hold each other accountable. So we do have that now, and we had it, almost is coming up on about a month, about 3.5 weeks, but I put it in on June the 5th. I actually wrote it in pencil, and we sent it out. That was on a Saturday, and we sent it out the following Monday.
Does the Newport News Police Department utilize chokeholds?
No, it's clearly in our use of force policy that we do not use chokeholds. We don't teach that. We don't use that. And whether it's in a handcuffing or a struggle, that's not something that we teach or use, and it's clearly written out in our use of force policy that we do not use chokeholds. Another question I got, I don't know if it's one that you're going to ask, but we do not do no-knock search warrants or immediate entry search warrants. Those are things that we don't teach and we don't practice.
Are police officers forbidden from shooting at moving vehicles? So
forbidden's a good word. We do not train, just like we don't train in no-knock search warrants. We don't train to use chokeholds. We don't train to shoot at vehicles. You don't know who's in that vehicle. If a vehicle's driving from the scene, we'll deal with it another way. Now, if you're injured and you're down, and an officer should try to get out of the way of a vehicle if it's coming towards them. But I want to be clear. I'm going to protect the men and women who put on this uniform and do the job to protect our citizens. If an officer is down and injured or pinned against a building and another object and they can't get out of the way and that vehicle's coming at them, to defend their life, right? To defend their life or the life of another, then they would be allowed to. But only in life-threatening situations in the preservation of life of their self or another individual. But even with that, they still have to be cognizant of who else might be in that vehicle. But we do not train to shoot at fleeing vehicles.
Are police officers in Newport News trained to de-escalate situations? You
know, it's a great question. They are trained to de-escalate. There's a couple of things that we focus on that we've really added to. De-escalation training, anti-bias-based police training, training with more in autism, more in dealing with mental health, how to respond and how to talk with mental health. We're training more and more on the right approach, not the paperwork and the procedure of domestic violence, but the right approach, how to talk to victims. I think those things are important. We have those in our academy. There's also CIT, which is training on critical incident training, or how to reduce, to calm things down. Now, I don't have the whole department trained in all of those things, especially critical incident training. That's one that I really want to expand on. We had a timeline to have the whole department trained by the end of next year, but when the COVID virus hit, it slowed some of those things down. It slowed some of those things down because of how close we're allowed to be together, with our distancing, and also that we bring in instructors from outside, and that's important. It's not a police officer reading a slide presentation about de-escalation or anti-bias-based police training or critical incident CIT training. I want to bring in professionals, right, that have had extra training, a mother or a father of someone who has autism that explains how their son or daughter or family member may react when they a loud noise or a light, or how they may respond to a uniform, or how they communicate. Mental illness, about how situations, de-escalating those things and taking a step back, and how just our presence may cause some anxiety. I get that, I understand that. So to answer your question, yes, we do have that training. However, I'm not satisfied where we're at. I want to continue it and develop it and make it longer. I think, I have to say, since we're on training, that, and it's one of our, right, it's one of our pillars in 21st century policing, but more and more men and women who wear this uniform are required and asked to respond to things that that's not what the original job was set up for. When we talk about people who suffer from drug addiction, people who are homeless, people who have mental illness, those are things that other professionals should be playing a role in. I'm not saying that we should be exempt from it altogether, but I don't think we should be the first choice. But because we work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we're always there. But we don't have the medical training to address, we don't have the psychological training to address some of those issues that cause those events. But it's thrown to us, right? So I think until we get other people on board, and we're making some strides, this department is very progressive. We have a plan in place to model after a program in Seattle where on mental illness calls that we will dispatch a paramedic and a psychologist first before a police officer will be there, or that we may show up and be in the background only if needed. But that training, de-escalation, procedural justice, cultural diversity, de-escalation, all those things, we have to expand on that and make it larger. So if I have to expand the academy by a couple weeks, so be it. I think that our citizens, we talk about reform, I think that's going to be our biggest push is training, training, training. What's the next best thing out there? Who offers it? Who offers it? And I don't want to be held to constraints. Well, this individual is the instructor. So if I have to send people to be trained on how to teach the program, then I'll do that because I want the whole department trained in these entities. It's important. And when I say the whole department, let me make no mistake. I'm not just talking about recruits. I'm talking about every single officer, including the chief of police.
How is your department keeping up with the new training techniques, and is there any training that you're looking on doing in the future? Sure.
So the big issues are the ones I just talked about: autism, de-escalation, cultural diversity. I want to spend much more time on that. Just the understanding of different cultures in our communities, de-escalation, procedural justice, anti-bias-based policing. All those things I want to continue to build on. But I also want to look at what's next. I'm not going to wait for another situation that happened in Minneapolis, or a situation that happened in Atlanta, or a situation that happened somewhere else. We're always thinking. Just 2 Fridays ago, the command staff and lieutenants got together and we talked a little bit about what's next, what's on the horizon. I want to look at our polygraph examination. We may ask the same questions that we did 20 years ago. I'd like to maybe tweak some of those questions. I talked to one of our investigators, Ms. Mercer, about that. And when I sit down to talk to her about it, she said she's already been looking at it. And that's important, to create a culture that we don't just wait for me to drive it, to put people in power, not micromanage them, and have them think outside the box. What's the next best thing? I've been working on this for about 3 or 4 months, but we're going to get it in mid-July. I'd asked the city manager and the city administration to help me with supervision. The data shows that the sooner a supervisor is on scene, use of force incidents go down and complaints go down. And I want to talk about those in just a second. But we will now have a ratio of 1 sergeant to 8 to 10 officers. And now I'm going to have a ratio from 1 sergeant to 6 officers, primarily in patrol. And that's where we have the most interaction with citizens. And that's going to be a key element. I think that's going to be a game changer, that I can handle 2 different scenes at one time. Lieutenant Pollock came up with the idea, if we have a hot call and we're sending 3 or 4 officers to it, in my day, not dating myself, right, we would call the sergeant and say, hey, this is what we have. Maybe instead of waiting to notify the sergeant about what happened, that if it's important enough for us to send 3 or 4 officers to a call, that we go ahead and dispatch a sergeant at the same time. So the sergeant's getting to that scene quicker. As we talked about, the sooner a sergeant gets there, use of force incidents go down, so do complaints. So I think that's going to be a big plus to have those extra supervisors on the street. But when I talk about complaints and training and what's best, we work with organizations like NOBLE, National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, IACP, International Association of Chiefs of Police. These entities look at departments across our country, not just here in the 7 cities or the Hampton Roads area, not just in the state of Virginia, but across the United States. What are best practices? What's working well in Denver, Colorado? What's working well in Cincinnati, Ohio? What's working well in Florida? What are they doing out in Seattle? And to take those entities and how do we mold it and make it fit Newport News? But we also look at, hey, here's something that a department may have done that wasn't so successful, or here's something the department did that caused a lot of problems, to make sure that we don't do that and have things in place to try to limit that from happening. You know, when I looked at our calls for service, and I've been here 2 years, when I looked at our calls for service, in 2018, officers responded to 160,000 radio calls. That means we interacted with 160,000 citizens. And out of that, we only received 106 complaints. 106 complaints out of 160,000 calls. And out of those 106 complaints, when we talk about force, we probably need to have a discussion about what force is. We only had 2 complaints of force used. 2. In 2019, we answered 20,000 more calls than we did in 2018. So 160,000 in 2018. In 2019, we had 180,000 calls for service. Out of that, we had 86 complaints. 106 complaints in 2018. We answered 20,000 more calls in 2019, and we only had 86 complaints. And we had 4 complaints of use of force. 4. That's important. People need to know that. That tells us that our training and our practices, they're good. It doesn't mean we should stop trying to do better, but what we're doing is working. We continue to move in the direction we are and look for best practices, but that's huge. Now people say, well, where do we see that information? In 2018, we published, one of the things I wanted to do was do an annual report. I worked with our media relations and our citizens about what do people want to see. All of the things I just laid out, our calls for service, the firearms that we seize, our homicide rate, our clearance rate, how many individuals suffer from gunshot wounds, how many domestic violence calls do we go on. All those things are in an annual report. They're on our website. You can look at them anytime you want. And it compares us primarily from the year to the year prior. Right? So 2018, I look at what we did in 2017. 2019, how do we did compared to 2018? This year, 2020, I want to see how we're looking in compared to 2019 of last year. We should be doing better. So when I talk about 5% reduction in crime, 9% reduction in crime, right now we're at 6%. Crime continues to go down in our city. The number of calls we respond to go up. Here's a plug, I need some more staffing, right? And I'd like some more officers to come to this city that are right here homegrown in Newport News. So when people are like, well, I think we should change this or I think we should do that. How about coming and riding with us, getting a look at what's going on out there, how officers respond to calls, how they interact with citizens, and I'm hiring. I'm looking for good officers to come in this department and change things, help us do better. Citizens require more. They want more. We're trained at a higher level than we've ever been. We're better today than we were yesterday, and we're going to be better tomorrow than we are today. But I need good quality people to come to this organization, people who care about this community, who want to see the right things done in our neighborhoods, right? And that we treat people all the same. I don't care what skin color you are. I don't care about your age. I don't care where you live, your zip code. I don't care about your income status. I'm going to treat those doctors and lawyers the same as someone who may be homeless and struggling from a drug addiction. Now that sounds like pie in the sky, but that is the culture I'm trying to create in this organization and what I expect. Do we always get it right? Absolutely not, because we're human. We make mistakes, just like anybody else. But 460 officers in this department, and 460 officers wear a body-worn camera. I don't know too many other professions that do that. Our high school teachers aren't doing it. Our doctors aren't doing it. Bus drivers aren't doing it. There's a camera in the bus, but not on individuals. And I appreciate that. It protects us. It helps us do better. It shows us how our citizens, our officers are reacting. It shows citizens how our officers are reacting. When citizens complain, we're allowed to let them see that body-worn camera footage if they want. That helps us. It keeps us to a higher standard. But we don't always get it right. We have to be able to say we're sorry. We have to be able to have open conversations. But I expect them to be fair, right? It has to be fair. I didn't mean to go too long on that question. When you talk about training, it's important to me of officers we bring in, how we train them, and the officers that are here.
It sounds like you've made quite a difference coming to Newport News. How would you say that has affected the community?
Well, I will tell you, I am blessed to be here. I'm very, very thankful. And I do not take this position that I sit in and the officers that I'm responsible for, the officers that I work with, the 180,000 citizens of this city, I don't take this position lightly. I've been doing this profession for 27 years. I love it. It's what I wanted to do. I'm not perfect. I make mistakes every day. And I got plenty of people around me to point them out to me. But I think what we're doing has impacted this community. I remember when I was blessed with this position, and what do you want? Was my question. And the response was, we want to increase community relations and decrease crime in our city. And I see, when I go on a community walk Saturday and people call out my name, not because I'm anybody important, but because I've met them, because I invest in this community and our citizens, right, and our youth. Look, I get it. Youth, right? I've got a daughter myself, and they're challenging. But the biggest passion I have are for young people, for youth. That's our future. The questions you're asking me are important. You're the future leaders of our communities, our country. When I see citizens on our Use of Force Review Board, not that sit and review after cases have been done 5 or 6 months, when citizens get a vote. Now, they've got to have some structure. They've got to understand what the law is and what our training is and how we train and our policies. That's important. To just come off the street and with no training or background and, well, that's good and I like that and I don't, that's not fair. You've got to understand what we do. Ride-alongs, our Citizens Academy. People line up, join. Monica White does a great job. We do 3 or 4 Citizens Academy a year. 25, 30 people in those classes. Those are the citizens. I ask them to give me their time and sit on our Use of Force Review Board and vote. The use of force that we use is in policy, it's out of policy, or it's in policy, but here's something we might be able to do better. They get a direct say. I use that for transparency. I also want citizens' input, but I also use it as a learning tool for the officers, myself, the department. How do we do better? What do citizens expect? When we talk about citizens that sit on our interview panels, so if someone wants to get promoted to sergeant, lieutenant, captain, assistant chief, they sit down on an interview panel with myself, one of the other assistant chiefs, and someone from our community. Chief Hudgens, our latest assistant chief, was promoted over a year ago. It was myself and Karen Wilds, who oversees public housing, and the president of the NAACP, Pastor Maxwell, helped me pick the next assistant chief of this department. Officers are going to kind of conform to the leadership. Dr. Rita Twiggs, Angel Nelson from the Boys and Girls Club. Individuals that sit on those panels, citizens ask different questions. I may ask policy and procedure. I may ask how you would react to a situation. Citizens ask, how are you going to treat our youth? How do you feel about our communities? How should we restructure and build and create better relationships? That's important. I want citizens to have a say. And it sends a message to officers who want to get promoted that, hey, the chief is saying citizens are important. It's also sending a message to citizens that I value them. When the young adult police commissioners, when we work with high school students, a freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior from every class. What is that? In any event that you see us do, a promotion ceremony, a reward ceremony, a graduation ceremony, our 911 service at 9/11, anything that you see this department do, National Night Out, you're going to have youth involved. If you go back and look at when I got sworn in 2018, there were youth on a stage playing instruments. The reason I do so much with youth is the same reasons. I want kids in this community, youth, high school students, the future, right, to know that they matter to me, that I love them. They matter to me. But I also want the officers to know who wear this uniform, that the youth matter to me. And officers are going to take on the auspice, right? They're going to do what your leadership does. So I got to create that culture. We go on community walks, and individuals, when I first started, they would look at us through the peephole or the shades. Now citizens come out and walk with us. We have 26 elementary schools. I don't have an officer I can put in each school. But I asked for volunteers to adopt, one person to adopt, am I saying it right? Adopt each elementary school for 30 minutes a week. Means whether we go in and have lunch, which I should tell you right now, that should be hazardous pay, I'm telling you. Walk the halls, say hello to them when they get on the bus or when they get off the bus, read to them in the library. That matters. And those kids come up and talk to you, and they will tell you everything. But that 30 minutes, you'll find that some officers will tell you that's the highlight of their day. Community policing has to be a foundation. It has to go both ways. We may not always agree, but you have to trust us. And we have to earn that trust. It doesn't come easy. We can take some isolated incident in our city where an officer may be rude or go through a red light, say something they shouldn't say, we correct it. Everything that we do wrong, every mistake it's not always discipline. It's to do better. How do we do better than what we're doing today? People make mistakes. Every traffic stop, the driver doesn't have to get a ticket. Every individual we come in contact with that breaks the law doesn't have to be arrested. I was at an event this week, and I pulled up and I parked the car and was getting ready to do a community walk, and there was two individuals sitting under a tree. They were drinking a beverage that you got to be a certain age to drink. And I got out of the car and they were startled, right? And I said, hey, relax, stay in the shade. I'm sure you guys are almost finished with that. Be safe. And you know what they did? Chief, you're all right, you're all right. That's important. That's important. Times are hard. There's a lot of unrest in communities today and across our country. But we haven't seen some of those things happen here that have happened in other cities. I'm not saying we're better than anybody else. But what I am saying is that I believe our relationships that we have with communities, our relationships that we have with faith leaders, our businesses, and maybe our relationship that we have with youth, I think it pays off in dividends, not just in crime reduction, not just in clearance rates, but also in human behavior. How we treat each other matters. Now, you know that I'm a man of faith. My mother taught elementary school for 30 years, 3rd grade. She still talks to me like I'm in the 3rd grade, but that's all right. My father was a United States Marine and spent time in Vietnam. And he worked at a paper factory. I remember the old spiral notebooks when I was in high school. They're both retired now, but they brought me up. I had a lot of coaches that helped me, a lot of mentors, people that I interacted with that helped me along the way. And when I got into police work, you could easily see the officers who got it. The best detectives in police work are the ones that know how to talk to people. The best officers are the ones that know how to talk to people. The individuals who made the best cases, that did the best cases in court, where they knew how to talk to people. So we have to value the best commodity that we have in this city are the individuals who live here, work here, play here, raise their families. We have great administration here. I have great conversations with our mayor and city council, city manager. You want to talk about oversight? I got it. 7 elected officials that make sure I do the right thing. A city manager and assistant city manager that ask hard questions. And that's fine, they should. We talk about policy and oversight. CALEA, Noble, IACP, Use of Force Review Board, panel interviews, social media and technology. I think I got one of the best media relations departments in the country. Some departments have 1 or 2 people. I've got a mix of civilian and officer, sworn and non-sworn, that market this department, that use social media in different ways. I'm thinking one of the things that are on the future for me is, do I need maybe some high school students to help us with our social media marketing? They're saying hashtag, I don't even understand what that stuff is. But getting the experts that are non-traditional. We've got 2 domestic violence coordinators in our department. Not we partner with them outside agencies. We hired them. So now they can see the reports from the minute they're taken and follow up with citizens. 2 individuals that are non-sworn. They've never spent one day in the academy, but they're domestic violence professionals that are teaching our recruits, our officers, and sending a message to citizens, male or female, that are victim of domestic violence, that we care about them. That's outside the box thinking. So when we talk about things I want to continue to do, I want to think outside the box, be creative, look at other departments, build on what others have done, learn from our own mistakes, and keep moving forward. But I have to stress, we will not always get it right. We are imperfect. But what we have to do is learn from that and build on it and do our best not to have it again. Admit when those things happen, and it's okay to apologize. Every complaint that comes in, I see it, I read it. I send a letter to the individual making that complaint. Sometimes I get calls back in saying thank you. Sometimes I get calls that, Chief, we don't agree with you. It's okay, I understand that. At least I'm going to listen. But that's a little bit, I hope I didn't go too long on that last question. I just think it's important that our citizens know and our officers know what my passion is, the way I'm trying to structure the department, the better community relations we have, 21st century policing, the Community Policing Foundation sets the standard, sets the foundation for everything we do moving forward. Sound like we did all right? Well, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today. You know, a lot of the questions you ask, a lot of citizens are asking, and I think it's good to sit down and I really, you know, one of the things I sit and think about is how do I get the message out more? How do I communicate better, whether it's through social media, press conferences, written directives, interviews with news outlets. And I hope this is another venue that I can talk to our citizens and our officers a little bit about what we're trying to do in this city and why I think we're seeing some of the successes that we're seeing and experience. So I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me, and like I said, I hope I didn't hold you too long.